let me thank you very much for the intercessory prayers you continue to say for our nation. I believe that Ghana continues to survive under God's favor because of the intercession that you continuously make for this nation. And I believe if it weren't for that intercession, we probably would not even survive as a nation to be sitting here and talking. Ghana has been blessed. We live in a sub-region that has been turbulent. Many countries have seen civil wars, Sierra Leone, Liberia, even next door Cote d'Ivoire. There have been unrest in Burkina Faso. Currently Mali is not at peace, and yet God has continued to bless us, to be able to live peacefully. And it cannot be by mistake. It must be because we continue to supplicate and ask for his blessings to let us live in peace. Because without peace, you have nothing. People who have lived in countries that have been torn by conflict will tell you that the most important ingredient in human existence is to have peace, to be able to live in your own country. The role of the church has been as a partner to government in helping with the material needs of our people. Everybody has two needs, spiritual and physical. The church attends to the spiritual needs of our people and creates a vehicle for them to continue to commune with their Creator. The government has the role of ensuring that materially and physically Ghanaians prosper and are able to live decent lives. But in addition to helping with the spiritual needs of our people, the church has gone over and beyond and partnered with government to also help materially to improve the lives of our people. Because what is the use of a congregation and what is the use of a clergy that attends to a congregation that materially is in bondage and is suffering? And that is why the church has stepped out, and you see the role of the church in education, you see the role of the church in healthcare, you see the role of the church in agriculture and agribusiness, you see the role of the church in many areas that wants to help to improve the material conditions of its congregation. And we must commend the church for that. I'm a member of the Assemblies of God Church, and I'm a member of the Men's Ministry. And on Men's Ministry Day, we take charge of everything that is done in the church, including the choir. We are the ushers, we are the choir, we preach the sermon, and I had the privilege of preaching 2 sermons at Men's Ministry Day, and I must tell you, the work that you do is important, and it's not easy. Not many people have had the experience of standing up there by the altar and preaching a sermon. When you do it, it comes so naturally. We believe that it's an easy thing to do. My first sermon was disastrous. My pastor had been selected to preach the sermon. And so I went to my pastor. I said, look, this will be the first time I'm preaching a sermon. What should I do? He said, so God will give you inspiration. I said, how will he do that? He said, well, you go home and take your Bible. And in the evening when the place is quiet, just open to any page and read. God will talk to you. My brothers and sisters in Christ, I went home when the place was quiet, the children were asleep. I took the Bible, I opened it, God didn't talk to me. I said, no, maybe it's the page that I opened. Let me close it and open it again. I opened it, I didn't hear any voice. So it continued until it was almost the day of the sermon. And still my mind was empty. And I said, look at this. I've been a politician for many years. I've stood on the platform. I've spoken eloquently to people about education, about economy, about agriculture, about industry and everything. And I just come to preaching the word of God, and my mind is so vacant, I don't know what to say. Somehow I managed to put down something. It wasn't the best sermon people have heard, but I mean, as president, they were respectful to me. Oh, that was a good sermon, I said. I knew in my heart that no, there's this one. But it did teach me a lesson. And in the second one, I prayed to God. I said, look, God, the last time you didn't talk to me. This time, let me hear your voice. And so I did the same thing. I opened, and it opened to the story of Esther and Mordecai. And I preached a sermon on God's favor. And as for that one, I myself was proud that, you know. I myself was proud that I preached a good sermon. But that is our church. I always tell the story of how I ended in Assemblies of God. I was baptized a Presbyterian because my father had been in the Presby church. And so when we were born, we were baptized in the Presbyterian church. And as I grew up, I continued in the Presbyterian church until I got married. You see the power of women after you get married. My wife compelled me to come to the Assemblies of God Church because she was a member there. And so the power of women, she dragged me, you know, into the Assemblies of God Church. But we've shared a sweet fellowship. And the point is, we all belong to the Christian fraternity, and we worship the same God. So it doesn't matter in which denomination you are, we are all children of God. So having said that, the church is also the voice of moral society, because there are many cases where, as leaders, you lose touch with actually what the people want and how things are going. And there must be a moral voice that is able to draw your attention and say that, look, you're going in the wrong direction. You need to reset. And that is why we appreciate it when the church comes up and speaks up about things that are not going very well in society. But I've always said that it is not necessary for the church to always jump into every conversation, because we have the institutions of democracy that are able to amplify the voices of the people and let them hear, you know, what the people are saying. During the period of military rule, normally the normal democratic freedoms are curtailed, and so people cannot speak freely. You don't have a free media, and so people cannot express themselves. And if things are not going well, the people are not able to speak out for themselves. And so at that time, the voice of moral society becomes important. And if you remember, in the military period, there was the Catholic Standard, Woes of a Patriot, and that is where the pastoral letters of the Catholic Bishops' Conference became very much anticipated, on the political level, because the church could say things that individuals could not say. But when you transition and you come into a democratic environment, freedoms are guaranteed. The government swears an oath to observe the rights of human beings. We have democratic media, and so people can freely express themselves. There are journalists who are doing their investigations, they are publishing and all that. And so when you get to that kind of environment, you do not need too much the voice of moral society, because then the people have the opportunity to be able to express their felt needs and what is going on. And so sometimes a little issue comes and people say, where is the church? Where is civil society organization? Why are people not speaking and all that? But it is only when the voices of the people are stifled that then the moral voice of society must step in. Since 1992, we've had a constitution that guarantees free speech and free expression. And Ghanaians have taken to it. Everywhere you have community radio stations, you have commercial radio stations, They hold discussions on politics, on economy, on health, on agriculture, and people are able to phone in and express their views. It is when these democratic rights are being whittled away, that is when you need the civil society organizations, traditional leaders, and the church to speak up again. Since 1992, things have been relatively well. Unfortunately, in these recent times, there seems to be an attempt to gradually erode some of those democratic rights. A lot of our institutions, democratic institutions, are becoming bastardized. The courts have been packed with judges appointed by the president in order that he can always get a favorable outcome from any judicial process. The parliament, where our MPs should be able to speak freely, has become an arena where their voices are suppressed and people are not able to express themselves in debates on the floor as freely as they should. I've been in parliament before, and I remember when Peter Alajete and Justice Annan were there. I mean, we had the latitude to speak our mind on the floor of the House. Unfortunately, the current crop of MPs tell me it's not the same. You have an oppressive speaker who would not allow you to express yourself. Aside from that, there's much that is going wrong with our democracy. Radio stations have been closed down because they are perceived to be voices of the opposition. Those that have not been closed down are so intimidated and terrified that if they speak truth to power, their stations too will be closed down. And so things that need to be said so that authorities can hear what is going on in the country are suppressed. And this is most unfortunate for journalists who are investigative journalists who take on a project and investigate and expose corruption in society. They are hounded and harassed and threatened with personal harm. Unfortunately, one of them lost his life, Ahmed Swali. He was killed, and up to now, the perpetrators of this crime have not been apprehended. And so what do you think will happen to other journalists looking at the fate of Ahmed Swali? And so we live currently in a situation that is not normal. This is not what the Constitution writers of 1992 perceived our environment to be. Unfortunately, these things are happening. An Auditor General who is a crusader against corruption is hounded out of office and asked to take his leave. Who goes on leave and they change the locks in your office? It means they don't intend you to come back. And what is his crime? Because he's been, stern on fighting corruption. And they say when you fight corruption, corruption fights you back. And incidentally, that is exactly what has happened. And so it becomes necessary for us then to step up and speak up. And that is why today you hear people ask, where are the leaders? Where are the leaders of the church? Where are the leaders of the clergy? Because the democracy we all set ourselves to build is being gradually undermined. And that is why we need to speak up when we see injustice happen. We all remember we had a simple by-election. We've had many by-elections. And you see the level of violence that was unleashed on that day. I mean, if you saw the pictures, you would think that we were in Somalia and not in Ghana. Masked men dressed in very frightening, military gear, security, paramilitary gear, wielding AK-47s, chasing people all over the place. They assaulted a member of parliament, and all government could say is that the member of parliament provoked them. Also, anybody who provokes, an armed person should be assaulted. If somebody is doing something wrong and a member of the clergy steps up to you and says, what you're doing is wrong, you cannot do this, then he has the right to slap him because he provoked it. I mean, we can't live like this in this country. And after it happened, after civil society and moral society all condemned what had happened, government was compelled to set up a commission of inquiry to look into the matter. Eminent jurists, Emil Schwartz and Henrietta Mensah-Bonsu, presided. They listened to testimony from all people who were eyewitnesses, and they came out with their report and their recommendations. It is a pity that up till now, government has ignored to implement the recommendations of the commission. And people who were clearly seen on video wreaking violence on people are walking today very proud. And so it's no surprise that one of them can take a video and threaten our communications director and say, "You've never been slapped before, eh?" I mean, that's the kind of impunity we're living with today. And you have a president who doesn't care because he thinks that that is the way he can hold on to power. We have a democracy. You come and serve. If the people are happy with your service, they will re-elect you. You don't need to unleash violence on the very people that you want to continue to govern. And indeed, a member of their party said that Ayawaso West Wagon was a dress rehearsal for the D-Day itself. And so you can imagine and you can foresee what they intend to do. The vigilantes, some of them have been absorbed into the security services. Others are given national security card, they wield weapons. I saw a very sad video of somebody in civilian clothes holding a pistol and threatening a police officer. And there were other security personnel there, including the military. And what I saw was them begging him to calm down. And I said, this guy should be arrested and should be behind bars by now. And yet they were begging him. And he was holding a pistol and threatening the police officer. I mean, what kind of country have we become? And all these people are running rampage. You've just seen this recent registration exercise. Thugs go and try to prevent people from registering. They go and cause confusion at the polling center in order to disrupt the process. And yet they do it with impunity and get away with it. We've never had registration and seen the level of violence that we have seen under this government. Registration is a peaceful exercise. Let everybody come out and write his name. But the worst one is the attempt to exclude some people who are citizens of this country and robbing them of their citizenship. And so, as soon as your name does not sound familiar in somebody's ears, then the assumption is that you're not a Ghanaian. The most ludicrous one that I heard was the strategy they use. They meet a group of people, they say bonjour. If you respond bonjour, who doesn't know bonjour in Ghana? Everybody, all of us went to secondary school. If you say bonjour, I'll respond bonjour. And when you respond bonjour, you say, you are a Togolese, or you are a Burkinabe. People whose ancestors were born in this country, have contributed to the progress of this country, are the great-great-grandchildren of people who lived in this country long before independence. Today, you go to register and somebody says, you are not a Ghanaian because your name doesn't sound familiar. It's not what he is used to. But the EC even says, okay, assuming you believe the person is not a Ghanaian, there's a challenge form, challenge him. There'll be a review tribunal, and he will go before, and you have to prove that he's not a Ghanaian. Even then, in some cases, they won't fill a challenge form, but they will physically prevent you from registering. But for me, the sad one is the use of the military. The military is our last line of defense. They're supposed to protect the territorial integrity of our country. When all else fails and nothing can be done to maintain law and order, then the military come in. And as for them, when they come in, they know one thing, to start shooting. And so in a civil exercise like this, you don't involve the military as the first point of security. Where's your police? Where are all your other security agencies? And yet we saw videos of the military being put in situations that were very embarrassing. I don't know which reasonable commander-in-chief will put his military in a situation to be hooted at and all that. It doesn't work like that. Often the military are stationed there on standby, and when law and order has broken down and they get a call from the commander and say, look, we need your help, they even have to clear from their higher authorities before they move into action. And yet, during this registration exercise, we saw military deployed everywhere at registration centers, actually physically at registration centers, determining who should register and who shouldn't register. It's not the job of the military. And so these are worrying developments, and we all need to be concerned about them. And I think that as the voice of the voiceless and the voice of moral society, it is necessary for me to interact and give you some of the perspectives that we have about what is happening. I've been in politics since 1996, and my demeanor is well known. I'm a person of peace, I'm modest, I'm humble, I don't like violence. And so, if violence would occur, it would not be with me as leader of the NDC. We'll work to have peaceful elections. But there's a threat that the ruling government will unleash their vigilantes on election day. And so I've said the communities should defend their democratic rights. If I live in a polling station and you come and attempt to snatch our ballot box or to disrupt the election process, as Ghanaian citizens, the Constitution says we must protect the Constitution. And the voting process is a part of the constitutional remit. And so if you attempt to disrupt the voting process, the community has the authority to arrest you. And so I believe that every community should be on its guard, because your vote must count. And if anybody attempts to disrupt the voting process or to undermine the constitutional right to vote, the community has a right to prevent the person from doing that. So we are not going to deploy vigilantes and all that. We want the will of the people to be known and to be heard. And so we pray for peaceful elections, and as our intercessors, I would ask you to add that to your prayer topics all the time when you offer supplication to God, that He will continue to favor this nation and He will continue to bless us with peace and unity, that we shall be one people and that we shall work together for the peace and prosperity of our nation. Recently, the church has been going through hard times. Indeed, everybody has been going through hard times because of the coronavirus pandemic. Restrictions were put on services that were necessary in order that we didn't continue to spread the infection. Today, all of us are sitting and wearing masks because we want to prevent our country from the rising infection of the coronavirus. And so a restriction of our individual and collective freedoms in the interest of curbing a pandemic is necessary. But sometimes, I dare say, some of the outcomes have not been the most pleasant, because we are all equal before the law. It should not be possible for political parties to flout that same law and get away with it. And yet, when the church, flouts the law, the punishment is very heavy and draconian. As we sit here, we have our Christian colleagues, a pastor, and some church workers languishing in jail. They were sentenced to jail for 4 years. I believe that that's a very draconian punishment. And we must all abide by the law, that's true. But we don't engage in selective justice, where you apply the law heavily on church workers who flout the law. And yet, during primaries, people were seen flouting it with impunity. Gatherings were not supposed to be above a certain number, and yet you saw huge numbers, not observing any protocols, and nothing happened to them. Unfortunately, education and awareness has been very poor. And so I came to register and then to greet a few of the chiefs in my traditional area and other areas. And I mean, people are not aware of the mode of transmission. Yesterday in Damango, they ambushed me on the road, a huge crowd of people, and nobody was social distancing. Many people were not wearing masks. And when I drew their attention to the protocols to prevent transmission, one of them told me, he says, "Oh, coronavirus doesn't affect Gonja people." I mean, can you imagine that? And he wasn't wearing a mask, he wasn't social distancing, he was shouting at the top of his voice. But that is because awareness has not been done properly. If you're faced with a pandemic like this, who are your key allies in making people understand, what it's about? It's the religious leaders, the traditional leaders, the assemblymen. Unfortunately, these key institutions have not been involved in the public education and public awareness. If the churches were preaching a sermon in church and telling people about COVID and how to stay safe, we probably would not be at this point where we are some of the highest numbers, in Africa. And so I think that, yes, the church workers who flouted the rule and were sentenced, have borne punishment enough. And if I were the president, I would grant them some amnesty. And so we all appeal to the president. I mean, if there's a remission of sentence for these church workers, I think that they've learned their lesson and everybody has learned his lesson. I think that he should apply his power of clemency and release them. We will all continue to work hard to make sure that this pandemic does not claim more lives in our society. And we all pray that soon a vaccine will be found so that we can do mass immunizations and protect our people so that life can return to normal. And so, like I said, we'll count on you to continue to pray for this country and pray that God delivers us from this pandemic. Several people have died. We express our condolences to their families. And I believe that the government should come out with a more comprehensive response plan. As we speak, we don't have any response plan to COVID. We're just instituting ad hoc measures. And that is why we're not able to control it. Testing has been reduced. Before there used to be random testing. Much of that random testing has stopped. It says people should be tested only if they present with symptoms. But already community spread is taking place. And we have people who are called asymptomatic. They can get infected, but they don't show any symptoms. They don't get a fever, they don't get a cough, nothing. But they're able to spread it on to other people who might not be as lucky. And so young people especially have a very strong immune system, and so they can get infected but not show any signs. But they can take that infection home and infect their fathers and mothers and grandparents, and they unfortunately might not have the same robust immune system and might succumb and die from the disease. And so let us all continue to pray and continue to create the awareness that is necessary to stop this pandemic in our country. But let me most of all thank you very much for taking time off to join me. And I wish that everything would go well so that our churches can open again, so that I can get the opportunity to preach my sermon again, maybe a good sermon. But may God richly bless all of us. Thank you very much.